The British government just did the unthinkable. It took a decision that will single-handedly destroy the entire British economy. Millionaires all across the UK are packing their suitcases and are moving away from the United Kingdom. Even one of the richest people in Britain, Nick Storonsky, the founder of Revolt, just migrated out of the UK. Countries such as Russia and China are not even witnessing such exodus of wealthy people. When rich people leave your country, you know something is going wrong. Something is wrong with your government, something is wrong with your economy. But what if I told you that the British economy or the British government is deliberately trying to move away rich people out of the country? That sounds strange, but if you look at the decisions that the British government is taking, that's exactly what's happening. Is the UK on a path to become a failed state? Or maybe it is already a failed state. One of the most important taxes that rich people pay attention to is the capital gain tax. It's the tax that you pay on your investments. Most countries across the globe try to lower their capital gain tax because it brings capital to that country. When the more capital you bring into your country, the more investments there are, the more jobs will be created, the faster the economy grows, and more taxes people are going to pay. The capital gain tax is the tax that you pay when the value of your assets appreciate. Imagine you spend $100,000 buying stocks. The value of your stocks have grown from $100,000 to $200,000. You made a profit of $100,000, and the tax you pay on that $100,000 is the capital gain tax. Before, if you had an income of $50,000, you would pay a 10% capital gain tax. Some countries have a 0% capital gain tax, but in this case, it was 10%. While 10% seems a very small number, you have to understand that this is the tax for people who are making less than £50,000. And £50,000 is not a lot of money. It's literally around $5,000 per month. So for the British economy or for the British government, if you are making more than $50,000 or more than $5,000 monthly, you are considered a high earners. Even this little tax, they have increased it from 10% to 18%. They almost doubled the capital gain tax for poor people, for people who are making less than £50,000. For people who are high earners, who are making more than £50,000, their capital gain tax have been risen from 20% to 24%. Do you think people will have more incentives to invest in the UK? Do you think now people want to invest in the British stock market, in the British companies? Or you might think that if you're a rich person, now you're gonna pay millions of dollars more in taxes. That's why it makes sense to leave the UK and live somewhere where you have a much lower capital gain tax. You can live whatever you want. You can make your money from whatever you want. And as long as you are not living in the UK, you don't have to pay that much taxes. This decision alone will single-handedly drive away so many rich people out of the UK. So before 2022 or back in 2022, if you made a capital gain income of about £12,300, you would not pay any taxes because that is such a little amount of money that the government is just caring about you. If you made £12,000 on your investment, good for you, keep it. If you make more than that, that is the only time that you are going to pay taxes. But in 2023, they slashed that number by half, and that allowance is now £6,000. Only under £6,000, you're not paying taxes. Any income that you make more than that, instantly an 18% capital gain tax. If you think the British government has stopped there, then you're mistaken. They slashed that number by half in 2025 to £3,000. Now only the first £3,000 are exempted from taxes. Everything else you have to pay an 18 or up to 24% in capital gain tax if you're a high earners. What is next? They're probably going to entirely get rid of this number, and next year they will introduce a new law. They will say that no more allowances. Even if you make a single penny out of the stock market or your investment, you will pay a 24% capital gain tax. Do you think people are now more incentivized to invest in the UK, or they are less incentivized to invest in the UK? And this is a very dangerous path to take because you're discouraging people from investing. How does the economy works? The people with money, they are investing in businesses. Businesses are building products, creating value and hiring people, and the economic machines starts to turn around, and that's how the economy works. Now you're raising taxes so much and you're telling them you'll pay so much taxes that risk and reward is not worth it. And then these rich people will look around and will say, oh, in that country, if I move to that country, not only that I have to pay a lower taxes, but in some cases I might be able to pay as low as 0% in taxes. And that's why rich people are leaving the UK. It makes no sense. There is literally not a single advantage to stay in the UK. You're paying so much in taxes, and in return you're not getting anything that is valuable. They have also increased the taxes on business asset disposal relief. This was basically a program created by the British government with the goal to encourage people to start businesses. So if you're going to start a business, if you're going to put your money to start that coffee shop, you would only pay a 10% in taxes. Well, that makes sense because starting a business is not an easy thing to do. It requires a lot of time, it requires a lot of capital, it requires a lot of energy, and at the end of the day, you could fail. Even if you're not doing some kind of a startup in AI like right now, and you're starting a traditional business such as a coffee shop or a restaurant, it is still difficult. You're still taking enormous risk. So imagine you started that coffee shop or a startup and you invested your $100,000 that you barely saved. And if you sold that business to someone else and you made a capital gain tax in this case, you would pay before a 10% tax, which is decent. It is not zero, but it's not like 20 or 30%. It's just 10%. They changed it and they have increased it in 2025 to 14%. Now, if you take all of that risk and you start that business and you successfully sell it, you will pay a 14% capital gain tax. From 2026, that tax is going to rise to 18%, as if this tax rate is also doubling. Within the next couple of years, they're probably going to increase this tax rate to 30%. And then you're sitting there and you're thinking, should I risk my investments or my savings that I have so saved, so I work so hard to save this money to start this business, when at the end of the day I have to pay like 30 or 40% in taxes? Doesn't make sense. I will simply go and find myself a job. But nobody is creating jobs because nobody is investing in the UK. So I would rather, the only option that I have is to work for the government. And then the government has to tax more rich people to be able to provide those jobs. But there are no more rich people in the country. Suddenly you see that your country has turned into a failed state. Another increase in taxes was that there was a program called Investors' Relief. The goal of this program was to encourage investors to invest in private businesses. The capital gain tax that we talked about earlier was about you investing in the stock market. In this case, the government created a program to encourage investors to invest in small private businesses. So you're coming up with an idea to start a small startup in AI. And because most people would not invest in that private startup since risks with you are much higher, yes, there is a higher reward, but there is also a higher risk. So the government created a program where if you invest in such private businesses, you will only pay a 10% tax rate when you sell your share to another investor. But even this tax rate, they have increased it to 14% first, but starting from next year, it will be risen to 18%. And I would not be surprised if this number will further be increased to 30%. If you are an investor, if you have a lot of money, are you now more motivated to invest in private small businesses in the UK, or you are less motivated to invest in private businesses? Because of the amount of taxes that you pay, for you as an investor, the risk and the reward makes no sense. This is just the beginning. If they have doubled their tax rate within a couple of years, what do you think is going to happen in 10 years from now? This number is most likely going to skyrocket. Now, the real question is that why the British government is purposefully harming itself. Doesn't the British government understand that by raising taxes on businesses and investors, you're only going to push away these people out of the country? And the real question is that who will build more businesses? Because the inflow of people into the UK are not the rich people, but rather the people who are seeking jobs. But the question is, who will provide these jobs when you're pushing away these people out of the country. The real problem with the UK is that it has been running a persistent deficit for the last 25 years. And the numbers do not lie. Starting in early 2000s, you can see that spending has grown dramatically while the revenues of the British government hasn't grown much. And that gap kept increasing and increasing and increasing. They tried to solve the problem by 2020, but then COVID happened and the British government is like, we are going to take the money and distribute it to every single Brit. Every single time that the government is distributing money, you have to ask yourself a very simple, basic question. Where is the money coming from? That money is a paper money. Is a digital money. The money can be created out of thin air. But when you're increasing the supply of money in the economy, you're creating massive inflation and you're devaluing the dollar. Yes, you could be happy that you received this paycheck from the government, but now the value of that paycheck or the value of those dollars have become significantly lower. Now you can buy a lot less things. Or the British government can borrow money from someone else. But if you have borrowed money, that money most likely has interest. And now you have to pay the interest on that debt. So never think for a moment that when the government is spending money, always ask yourself where the government is taking that money. In the short run, a lot of people get happy. Oh, the government is giving us money, but at what cost? Who is going to pay for that? And now it's time to pay for all of that money that the government has borrowed. And that's why you see that spending is still growing while revenues aren't growing much. So the government is facing a persistent deficit. And because the government cannot close that deficit, cannot close that budget, what do you think they're doing? They're raising taxes on everyone else. Because they can't raise taxes furthermore on the average Brits because they aren't making even more money. Imagine for a moment that if you're making around $5,000, you are already considered a high earner. That is insane to say the least. In fact, they're already throwing the idea of a wealth tax. If you have a certain amount of wealth that you have accumulated, maybe we should tax you. You've bought yourself penthouses, apartments, cars, whatever. You have wealth, we are going to come after you. And a wealth tax is going to literally destroy every rich person's life because those rich people are not going to stay in the UK. As soon as they will realize that they have to pay a wealth tax, they will sell their assets in the UK, they will move them to countries where wealth tax does not exist. In fact, these people are moving to countries where there aren't any taxes or whatsoever, so they can continue making money. I know some people might actually hate on the rich people. I mean, they have so much money, why don't they pay taxes? Well, they're already paying a lot of taxes. This is how the system is designed. Most people are not ready to take the risk to build businesses, invest in the right assets, and grow these businesses that provide those jobs. If it was so easy, then why do we have so many people on one side, but so few businesses on the other side? Why do more people do not start businesses? Because it's difficult, it requires capital, and there is a real risk that you are going to lose all of your money in the process. This is how the modern society works. On one side, you have those people who are starting businesses. On the other side, to start these businesses, you need capital, you need money. It's one of the factors of production. On the other side, you have people with money. These people either got their money through their paycheck over time, they got their money by starting businesses in the past, or they made their money by investing in the stock market and the valuations of those stocks have risen and now they're rich. So in order to grow your economy, you want investors to invest in these businesses. Businesses create value, and then they pay dividends or return those investments at a higher value back to the investors. And these businesses provide the jobs, they provide the value, they provide the products. So the modern economy works in such a way that you want to ensure that you attract the businesses and investors into your country. Now, because not everybody is capable of building a business. So countries today across the globe are competing against one another to create a more favorable business environment to lower taxes, provide better services, provide better environment for them to attract them. So when on one side the British government is creating an unfavorable environment for the businesses, Other nations are creating much more favorable environment for the businesses. So these people are looking around and they're like, why do we pay so much in taxes when we can move to that country, pay far fewer taxes and get far better quality of life? And that's why in this economy, the only way to save yourself is to start investing, because they will keep raising taxes. And if you're an investor, that will give you an ability to move out and live wherever you want. If they raise taxes in the UK, you're just going to move to a different country that provides you with a 0% capital gain tax. But if you're stuck with your job in one place in the UK, even if they raise your taxes to 50%, you have no other option but to accept that. Even if you're on a paycheck today, you should start investing to build that income, to build those investments. The moment your investments reach a certain level, then those investments will be able to replace your job. But the only way to achieve that, the only way to reach there is to start investing as soon as possible. And if you want to know what are the top 5 stocks that you should be buying right now, then check out the first link in the description of this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.